Pharaoh arose in Egypt, who had not known Joseph. Threatened by how the Israelite nation had grown in strength and in number, he attempted to restrict their power and influence by enslaving the Hebrews. But the Israelites continued to grow until Pharaoh decided to take an even more drastic measure, that every boy born to an Israelite must be killed. But 2 midwives, Shifra and Pua, boldly defied this decree. Being asked to commit an egregious injustice, they refused. Pharaoh confronted them, asking, "Why have you done this thing, letting the boys live?" And the midwives brazenly lied to Pharaoh, the most powerful person in the land. Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. Because of this great deed, this great act of courage, God recognizes the midwives and rewards them for their righteous behavior. And to be honest, it's hard to fully capture the bravery of this subversive act. These 2 women not only stood up for justice, but they put everything on the line, including their own lives. And their rebelliousness is twofold. They not only chose to defy Pharaoh's decree, but then when they were confronted by Pharaoh himself, they continued their deception, putting themselves in risk of further danger. Shifra and Pua were not only social justice warriors, to use a phrase from today, but specifically reproductive justice warriors, fighting to ensure that the Israelites had the right to have children and to birth and parent children with as much dignity as they could, to create the families that they dreamed of. A tiny sliver of freedom, whilst their bodies were in chains. And there's a debate about the identity of these 2 women, whether they were Egyptian or Israelite, as the Hebrew is vague. Were they Hebrew midwives or midwives to the Hebrews? And up until this year, I've always preferred to interpret them as Egyptians. I found pride and comfort in imagining these 2 women willing to put their lives on their line for people who were not their own. And usually when I read this text, I am filled with pride and admiration for these courageous, rebellious women. But this year, the story has been a painful reminder of the absence of modern-day Shifras and Puas. I long for the kind of allyship that Shifra and Pua offered, a bold, selfless stand for the dignity of Jews and, in particular, Jewish women. In this moment, in many justice spaces, it feels as if Jewish lives do not hold the same value, that we are not worthy of physical and psychological safety, that our experiences are discounted and ignored. It's infuriating to see social media posts by organizations claiming to fight for reproductive rights, only to dismiss Jewish pain and vilify Israel. At an interfaith reproductive rights conference I attended, the exclusion of Israeli women's suffering felt like a slap in the face. Having visited Israel on a solidarity mission with the Federation, I had heard firsthand accounts of the violations of reproductive rights that occurred on October 7th. Stories of rape and sexual violence and cold-blooded murder of young adults just trying to have fun and dance at a music festival. I heard the panic in voices of Israelis contemplating the possibility of female hostages returning home carrying the unborn children of their captors and rapists. I wanted to stand up and scream, "Do we not deserve the same compassion and justice you claim to fight for?" But sadly, I did not have the bravery or courage of Shifra and Pua, and I was silent. A silence stemming from fear, yes, but also my own anger and heartbreak. To be clear, I do think that we as a Jewish community need to reckon with the atrocities that have been committed against Gazans, including the way that reproductive rights have been flagrantly violated. But this is not a zero-sum game. We can and should have compassion for every human being that has been affected by October 7th and the subsequent war. But I can't help that it feels like every time we open our mouths to advocate on our own behalf, we are told that our pain doesn't matter. And it feels like this is an important time to be having this conversation as Be'ezrat Hashem, with the help of God, we might finally be emerging from this ongoing nightmare. And we all will need to reckon with the destruction, with the loss of life, the pain and violence that was perpetrated on both sides, the trauma that has already scarred lives and will reverberate through generations. But I want to talk about this tonight, not only because of the ceasefire, but because it is Martin Luther King weekend. And this is a Shabbat that we have historically called Justice Shabbat. For far too long, we focused our fight for justice outward, pouring our energy into allyship while neglecting the injustices we face ourselves. And that ends now. It's time to unapologetically demand justice for our community, even when it feels uncomfortable to do so. So this year, I'm choosing to read Parshat Shemot differently. In my eyes, Shifra and Pua are Hebrews. They are Jews, using their role to subvert injustice, bravely standing up for their people, helping them not only to survive, but to flourish. In our Torah portion, God calls to Moses from the burning bush and assigns him the Herculean task of returning to Egypt to free his people from slavery. And he immediately responds to God with a question. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? He asks. Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs interprets Moses' question not as a question only of his capability, but also about his identity and his community, of where he belonged. Moses was a Hebrew by birth, but raised in an Egyptian household. He fled to Midian, where he created a home, married a Midianite, and lived for many, many years. Who is he to save the Israelites? Rabbi Sachs beautifully offers. Who am I? Asked Moses. But in his heart he knew the answer. I am not Moses the Egyptian or Moses the Midianite. When I see my people suffer, I am and cannot be other than Moses the Jew. And if that imposes responsibilities on me, then I must shoulder them. For I am who I am because my people are who they are. So tomorrow morning, when I am praying with my feet at the MLK parade, I will be showing up for justice for every marginalized community and for justice in all its forms and iterations. But I will also be channeling my inner Shifra and Pua, my inner Moses, and I will be showing up intentionally, loudly and unapologetically for my people, for the Jewish people. I will channel my anger and my despair into a renewed commitment to work even harder to create a world where every person, Jewish or not, feels safe, heard, and valued. This is the moment to reclaim our voices, to be both the Moses and Shifra and Pua of today. We will show up with anger and with sadness, yes, but also with hope, with love, and with the unshakable belief that justice is not a gift that we wait for, but a demand that we make for ourselves and for all people.